the plumber cut the hole without even asking me. And, it's like...
A good GC catches this stuff because they've had this stuff go wrong, and unfortunately It takes 30 years to be a good GC because you have to make every mistake. Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. I'm joined by Design Editor Kiley.
Hello.
Digital Brand Manager Rob Watzak.
Hey there.
And Producer Jeff Rose.
Howdy.
You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Well, we got a great show for y'all today, so we're going to jump right into it. Let's start with a little feedback. In 233, we were talking about how to prevent squeaks in hardwood flooring. And the suggestion from the industry for decades has been to use asphalt felt paper underneath the flooring to kind of act as a cushion and a decoupling layer. And somebody on YouTube named GC said, just curious if felt paper off-gasses or has a smell. I've only ever used it on roofs, so never paid attention. I wonder if there are any alternatives for indoor applications. It smells bad for a while, but didn't when my installations, which have been a few, it didn't linger, but it did smell like, you're doing roofing for a period, but then the smell goes away. And I'm sure the smell that you're getting is off-gassing of volatile organic compounds. So it's good that that's ordinarily installed when the house is under construction and has a chance to clear out before the people take occupancy.
Would you guys ever recommend red rosin paper instead, if he doesn't want to smell it at all?
So a lot of people use that material for that purpose. It's second best for sure. It's thinner. It doesn't have the kind of adhesive quality that the good old fashioned asphalt does.
I came across a product called Quiet Walk. Have you ever heard of that?
Mm-mm. What's that, Kiley?
It's a recycled filament. The downside is that it's also a vapor barrier, so you have to consider that. But it's Green Guard certified, apparently, and an option.
There you go. What were you going to say, Ron?
I was going to say, in those installations you've done it, have you noticed it even after all the flooring was down and there was none of it exposed? The smell?
Hardly.
Yeah.
It could have been I was immune to the smell at that point, but it didn't seem like it stunk. So another listener on the YouTube space had some other suggestions for products that were it's meant to be used in place of asphalt felt in this application. So if you're interested, check that out. That was episode 233. We also heard from another listener regarding our discussion of cordless power tool batteries. You may remember that Barbara asked about rebuilding her Milwaukee drill, and there was some discussion about buying new batteries and their expense. But he writes, hearing stories of batteries on the cast seems those working on houses are missing the obvious. Battery-powered drills don't make sense to me. They're $200 a set, and the batteries, when they're charged, are often fried. Porter Cable sells a standard variable speed 3/8-inch chuck drill capable of driving screws and drilling holes for $32. It weighs less, lasts longer, never runs out of juice, has a great variable speed function, but requires power. A small price to pay for all these benefits. On price, we're talking 6 times the price for 4 times the life, for a total of 24 times the out-of-pocket cost. Crazy cost to save the inconvenience. As a part-timer, I'm happy with my choice. Of course, full-timers going job to job could easily justify the price. Keep your attic sealed. Signs off, Rick.
Yeah, you know what, Patrick? So this is something I think about a lot because the older I get and the busier I get, the more convenient I need things to be in order to get them done. And tools that make my life faster and more convenient are always the first thing I'm willing to spend money on. I do understand that if you're the kind of person who's just doing an occasional project and you're a frugal person and you're interested in saving money, then certainly a corded drill is still a totally acceptable tool to use. But
you're crazy. That guy's crazy.
I'm just saying, if that's his priority. But yeah, that the one thing I would never give up is my cordless tools, and they just keep getting better and better.
I'm like Charlton Heston. You're going to have to pry it from my cold, dead hands. Rick, you have to buy a cordless drill, and then you will understand that it doesn't have to be an expensive one. It can be one that costs $50, and it's going to make your life so much better. And you'll use it for things that you never thought you would.
And you know what? Wait till the big Christmas sales or any holiday sales, because they practically give away, especially some of the lower price brands like Ryobi, they practically give away those kits, the small kits of cordless tools. So
I'll concede that I was a hesitant adopter of many cordless tools. Like what jumps to mind is a reciprocating saw or a right angle drill. But with the improvements in battery technology and those things don't involve a compromise when you go from corded to cordless anymore. The only compromise is the price. It's you're paying more, but it's just so much nicer to use.
I've been listening to you guys talk about your cordless tools for 2 solid years, probably daily. You are,
and you know what? There are almost no tools left that fall out of that category. I mean, you've got decent lawnmowers, you got real chainsaws. I know a lot of the guys who are really into their chainsaws, that's probably like where they draw the line. But
those people increasingly have nothing to complain about too. It's interesting. One of our coworkers at Taunton, when I was testing cordless chainsaws, he laughed. He's like, "That's ridiculous." I was like, "You just have to try it and you'll get it." And,
was that
and I
Jay?
think Jay, yeah.
I remember that day. He came back. He was like, "I'm sold."
Do you still using the Milwaukee, Rob?
Well, actually, Andy's got it right now.
Of course he does. I got to get that back.
Yeah. I could use it right now, but now's not really the time for me to go collecting tools.
No.
So let's start with Jeff. What have you been working around the homestead on? Have you got your network situation all figured out? Are you still working on your basement? What's going on there?
Did a little bit in the basement. It was just such a rainy, miserable weekend that watched a lot of movies, ate a lot of popcorn, but a little bit in the basement, not a whole lot. Made myself an L fence for my table saw. That's about it.
A what?
An L fence? Yeah.
To cut raised panels?
No, I was actually doing some jam extensions for a window. So I needed to do some rabbets and then non-parallel cut.
How fancy. What have you been doing, Kiley?
Cleaning window panes, and I have a lot of them.
Inside, outside, both?
On the first floor, both. But I'm nervous on the ladder, so I can't get the second floor, which is where I'm looking out of the window more these days. So
sure.
I wish I could get up here with it because, they're dirty. But
what's your preferred window cleaning method, Kiley?
I thought you might ask me that. I'm a big proponent of newspaper. I think it does the best job. So Windex and newspaper and tedium.
That's
patience
old school.
for tedium. It's old school.
Yeah.
Works. Yeah.
So do you subscribe to newspapers, or where are these newspapers coming from?
What's that paper around here? The Voice? That paper?
Is it a free one?
Yeah, it comes in the mailbox. Yeah.
I'm sure that's high quality journalism too.
Right.
What have you been doing, Rob?
Oh, well, I think like most people who are crafty people, I'm focusing a bit of time on my workshop. Although, I built my barn 18 years ago, and it's never really been a finished workshop. And I'm finally in that last push. I did my drywall in there. Now I'm just cleaning and organizing tools, getting tons of those little plastic bins so I can organize every bit of hardware that's right now just dumped in 5-gallon pails. And but also, gardening. It's the gardens. We're having a little bit more time to garden now. My wife works for a seed company, so we got tons of seeds. In fact, her company is selling they're 40% up on sales right now for garden seeds with everybody stuck at home.
I get it. It makes perfect sense. People have more time. They need something to divert themselves, and gardening with little kids is super fun.
Yeah. So we've got a big baker's rack in our bathroom with grow lights on it. and veggies and flowers and all kinds of stuff growing in there. I got some Carolina Reaper peppers growing in there. If you want to
That's not
save
what I
some
thought you said.
But it's right next to our bathroom window because we get some good light in there during the day, and it's right next to the sink, and we remember to water everything that way because we pass through there often enough. And but at night, the light coming from our bathroom window before we shut the grow lights out for the night is like a floodlight projecting on our neighbor's house. So
Bet they love that.
Reminded you of this fact, or this is something?
No, actually, they actually didn't even complain about it. I was just walking the dog one night, and I come down the street, and I'm like, "What the heck is that glow?" And I look up, it's my own bathroom window.
Nobody's going to ask you about that.
No. I'm not the only one in the neighborhood either. I was walking around and saw a couple other big bright windows full of grow lights too.
I believe it.
But in my neighborhood, they might not all be vegetables.
I doubt they are. I've been busy too. I pulled the trigger on cutting my window opening on Saturday, and despite the poor weather conditions that kept Jeff from working on the house, I was out there cutting holes in the rain. And I can tell you, having water drip on your neck from the eaves as a carpenter is one of the worst things that ever happens. It's just the worst. And
I've had that happen.
It's awful.
It is awful. As a gardener, I used to have that happen.
Additionally, I was so wanting a cordless circular saw to cut the opening instead of dealing with the cord and the danger of using a circular saw in the rain. It would have just been so nice to have a big, powerful corded circ saw to cut the hole through the wood siding I have. But I persevered. That they were in the opening at the end of the day, and in the evening I wrote my forgiving and thoughtful wife into helping me air seal the window to the drywall with this amazing air sealing tape. I'd never used this stuff before because it costs like $1 a linear foot, but I see why people in the super high performance building sector use it, because it is so superior to anything I've ever used for that job.
So what's your plan for the outer flashing details on those windows?
Rob, we're under an international outbreak, and you're worried about flashing. I don't understand.
That makes perfect sense to me. He's been with Fine Homebuilding a long time.
So I've adopted the hope for the best, cock the rest approach to flashing this opening. It's tucked really well under the overhang, and I do have the materials lapped in the correct way. I've had difficulty integrating flashing into the felt paper because this cord it's nailed to the stuff that's underneath, so you can't get anything up real high. So I did my best, and I plan to use some more of that acrylic tape on the outside. Yesterday, I just primed the now exposed end cuts with oil-based primer. So I have to let that dry. It takes a couple days for good oil-based primer to dry.
Yep. Sounds good.
Boy, it has made such an amazing change in my workspace and life generally. It's just so much nicer in here. I wish I would have done it years ago. I really do. So those of you out there, put some windows in anywhere. Just do it.
Start making holes.
Should we get to some questions?
Yeah.
You guys ready?
Sounds
All
good.
Right. Hi, FHBP gang. I work as an independent contractor, mainly to large animal rescues. While a large portion of my time is spent on fencing, I do a fair amount of repairing and retrofitting older farm buildings so that they are suitable to house animals safely and comfortably. Having worked on a number of century-old barns, I've seen quite a variety of things, from awe-inspiring hand-hewn mortise and tenon craftsmanship to not so pretty but functional DIY farmer fixes, and occasionally downright scary makeshift work that leaves me dumbfounded and running for temporary support columns. Anyway, recently I encountered something that I hadn't seen before, and I'm puzzled. A client of mine bought a 10x10 utility shed, which I will retrofit to house birds. This is a common solution for birds because they're small and don't require any specially designed reinforced walls like pigs and cows do. But when I looked inside the shed, I was really surprised. I saw the wall studs are oriented sideways by comparison to conventional wall framing. The wider side of the stud lays flat against the exterior wall sheathing. I've seen this done in interior walls before, but I assumed it was a non-structural assembly which saves space by creating a thinner wall. So is this method of framing a valid way to build a structural wall? Couldn't find much info online, so I'm turning to you. Thanks so much for a great podcast. My wife and I look forward to it every week. This comes from Michael from Milton, Ontario, Canada. He says, please tell Kiley that a reel mower sharpening kit can be ordered for about $25 to $30 and requires no sharpening experience to use. Did you know that, Kiley?
No, but I'm so excited to know it.
Have you ordered one yet?
I watched a video. I'm not making any purchases at the moment, but it's on the list now. It's awesome. I watched a video. It's right up my alley. So, thanks, Michael.
So I was intrigued by this thing, right? So I go to the Amazon and I find two kinds. One that uses like this abrasive slurry, and another one that like looks like it uses sandpaper. Which kind did you watch the video about?
The video has an aluminum oxide abrasive pad on a steel metal plate or metal plate. And so it's like a piece of tape, and you put it on the plate, and then you adhere, put it on the fixed bottom plate of the mower, screw it in, and then you push it on a hard surface like my deck or something for a little bit, and then supposedly sharp as new. I can't wait.
You have to take video of this for the podcast.
I'll try.
We've got to.
I don't have anybody around. We can do that, but I'll try.
Well, yeah. Somehow I've got to see this because it sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Rob,
awesome.
You seem familiar with this.
Well, no, actually not really. I was just thinking when she said aluminum oxide pad, I'm thinking it's just the sandpaper strip.
That's what it looks
like. Looking at the pictures, I was like, I probably have stuff lying around my shop that I could make one of those things out of. So I'll have to try that, and we can compare notes.
You have a reel mower too? I don't think I knew that.
I do. I had collected several of them that I was planning on ganging together to swap out on the front of the bike plow.
That's awesome.
Oh my God.
So we'll see. Maybe in the next couple of weeks, since I've got a little more spare time, you'll see me mowing my lawn with the bicycle plow.
Things just keep getting weirder.
I forget what this question was. Did this guy have a question?
The question about the shed? Yeah.
Shed.
So
That's right. Framing.
So I'll start on this one, because for one thing, if you're on an old farm, in most places, farm structures don't really have to comply, especially small sheds, don't have to comply to any kind of codes. Like, they kind of have some loopholes, at least they used to. But also, it's like, that's just pretty typical, is that, someone will just build something just to get it done, regardless of what their knowledge of building is, whatever the materials they have lying around. Now, but the thing that I will guess, and we don't have a picture of this shed, do we?
I don't think so. I didn't
Patrick, no?
No shed picture.
So what I'm guessing is that depending on what type of siding is on this shed, I mean, typically on a vertical board sided shed, you would have purlins to nail the siding to. So what he's describing could just be purlins, and maybe in the corners, the studs or posts are the actual structural members. And those purlins are just in there
that they were studs, they were turned the other way. So I think that's what they were.
Yeah.
I think it was probably to save space, right? Because it was only 10 by 10. If you turn the stud sideways, you gain a little room.
Could be.
How much, though? Not very much, really.
I mean,
not very much.
No way of really knowing unless we saw some more pictures of this thing. So maybe we can ask him to send some pics for next time.
So, he asked if this is a normal way or, a good way to build a wall. And of course, the answer is no, because at a minimum, it leaves very little room for insulation. And also, it's going to have way less wind resistance because the stud is much thinner in that direction. So it's going to want to deflect under load. So no, it's not a good way to build. And I have firsthand experience with this because when I was in college, I lived in this 71 mobile home, and trailer homes of that era had the studs turned sideways, and when you'd slam the door, the freaking thing would shake.
Is that why they were done that way, to save some room?
I have no idea, Kiley, why they were done that way. I can only guess it was cheaper. Or, I don't know.
Are those things insulated?
Minimally.
Not very well.
Minimally. They have
But
all the problems of a poorly air sealed home. They have lots of leaks. They have poor air barriers both on the exterior walls and on the underside, especially. They're way better now, but they were just terrible. They had very minimal standards.
can we step back and acknowledge that the function of this shed to house birds is awfully cool?
Yeah, I agree. I really do.
Independent of the studs. It's just a neat idea.
I like that birds are less tough on stuff than cows and pigs. Of course.
But they make a mess.
I believe it.
Yeah.
So in your farming career, Rob, did you house birds at Green Chimneys?
Actually, yeah, Green Chimneys has not only chickens and ducks, but there's a wildlife rehabilitation center there. This is a place in Brewster, New York, that I worked for a few years. And the wildlife center, they basically built these sort of ramshackle cages that sat right on the ground, so they didn't have floors, and that way they could just do mulch, wood chip floors, which is not very good for keeping the rats away from the bird food, unfortunately. But
oh man, I bet.
Yeah.
Of course, like we're all exposed to internet ads recently, and I was watching this electronic rodent trap that someone was shooting video of, and the poor little thing climbs in this tube, and then it gets juiced, and then like falls out of it. It's horrible. That's what you needed there, Rob.
Yeah, right.
Juiced.
This comes from Neil in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, Canada. He says, love the show. Love the magazine too, but a lot of the homes and products featured are beyond my average means. The podcast is a little more down to earth, real people, real problems, real budgets, and trade-off solutions. There ain't no magic bullet, he says. Writing to you today because Click and Clack are off the air, and I have no one else to turn to. My 80 young mother lives in a 1960s high-rise bungalow. So for those of you who are wondering what a high-rise bungalow is, we have some photographs on the podcast page. So it's just a split-level house on a sloping lot is how I would describe it. She always parks her car in the garage and had an old uninsulated one-piece garage door with no weather stripping until about 10 years ago when she replaced it with a nice R13 garage door with weather stripping all around. Way tighter. Well, that's what I thought was a good thing until the paint started peeling off the interior masonry and her car rotted away to nothing in 10 years. The body looked good, but the mechanic said that he couldn't find any solid spots to pick up the car on the hoist. You might be thinking that 10 years isn't bad for a car living in Northern Ontario, but you should know that my mom only drove 14,000 miles a year in 10 years, or 14,000 total in 10 years. In the last several years, she stopped taking long trips and only drove 600 miles a year. The garage slab is pretty much wet all the time, so I highly doubt there's a vapor barrier underneath it. Am I thinking that the tight garage door trapped all the moisture and it condensed on the underside of the car? Am I correct in thinking this is what destroyed the car? He goes on, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but he has a number of potential solutions. And I think he's really lucky because he has the two nerdiest gearheads of our FHB staff here to talk about this, right, Rob?
Sure.
My thoughts so far. Okay, he says park outside. But there's an awful lot of snow to brush off in the winter, and it would be a sauna in the summer. Okay. He says, remove the weather stripping from the garage door and or adjust the height so it stops short of the ground by an inch or two. The thing is, my mom's cleaning lady would have to be sweeping out the leaves all the time. Okay. He says, paint the floor with an epoxy as another option. Install heavy-duty vinyl garage vinyl flooring. Replace the fixed window in the garage with an operable unit. How about installing a bath fan to the outside and wired on a humidistat? Other ideas? Okay. So what do you think about this, Rob? Is this wet garage rotting this car?
So yeah, I mean, we've talked about this so much. Basements and then ground floor garages kind of have the same problem. It's like you got a leaky old house, and for years there's no problems because you just leave it alone. And obviously, like you said, they didn't put vapor barriers under concrete slabs a lot in there.
It still don't.
Well, yeah. And so as soon as you start tightening up a space like that, you are going to create a lot more moisture coming up. You're going to trap a lot more moisture in that space. I mean, the first thing I think about is like to try to prevent moisture from coming up. I mean, what do you think about the vinyl or rubber mats? I mean, I don't really know. If you did a continuous rubber floor, which could be pricey, but if you did a continuous rubber floor and you did it tight to the edges, do you think that would be in danger of causing any mold growth underneath it? I mean, if you have one of the sort of floorings that comes in tiles where there's lots of gaps in it, I could see that being a problem. But
what if you just did a mat underneath the car, not wall to wall?
Well, honestly, that could help. But if you're seeing condensation in the space itself, there's nowhere for that moisture to go. Like I've seen in people who have gravel driveways put rubber mats, like horse stall mats. In fact, I even did that underneath my 280ZX last summer because I got a gravel driveway myself.
Me too.
You just wanted a chance to mention that you have a 280ZX.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not so proud of that brown. That wasn't their best. But anyway.
So I want to say something here. So you were the first person that ever raised the question to me, does parking on a gravel driveway make your car rust faster than if you parked on asphalt or concrete? Kiley, you want to say something?
I'm here to say that I think it does, because I moved to this river bed and I have a gravel drive and I have a 2016 car. I've never had any rust issues with it until I moved here. Within a year's time, I needed new brakes because they were completely rusted out. So and in fact, I think it was you, Rob, that said you should be parking on a mat, which I didn't do, of course, but
yeah.
I'm just going to say, Kiley, I am still very skeptical of this whole thing.
Are?
I am.
Why would a brand new car rust out like that? That does
because you need brakes after.
Fly. I've never had that kind of. This is like my 5th car. I've never had rusted brakes.
Well,
ever.
Okay, and your car also came from Seattle. Came from
No, it didn't. No, I bought my car here, brand new, 13 miles on it, so it was in pristine shape when I got it. 3 years later, I need new brakes because they're completely rusted out.
I think it's reasonable to expect you'd need new brakes 3 years later on an inexpensive car,
Due to rust?
Especially with your Mario Andretti driving style that I've witnessed.
No, you're not going to convince me. But what's your recommendation for this guy?
I'd say move.
No,
I would say move from Northern Ontario, where they're just using tons of salt. I think that's what rusted this car out. And I think that the problem is perhaps exacerbated by these. She doesn't drive this car a lot. So say she makes a trip in the wintertime, the roads are all covered with salt. Then she brings it into this relatively warm garage and it sits where you have this chemical reaction that can take place. Whereas if she was driving it, more regularly, just wet roads would tend to rinse off the salt. And I think that would potentially help. But I don't doubt that the moisture is high in the garage. I think the way to try and solve that cheapest would be to really clean the floor, put down a couple coats of latex paint. The good thing about latex is it does allow some vapor to move through it. So it'll slow it down. But unlike epoxy, which totally stops the vapor transmission, epoxy wants to just pop off in sheets when the vapor drive is sufficient. So I would say really clean the thing with a pressure washer, let it dry really good, try some latex paint made for concrete, which it's going to have some resistance to the alkalinity of concrete, and try that first. I think the mat could really help too, but that's not going to do anything about the walls. I also think he should do his very best to make sure that the ceiling air barrier above the garage is tight, because stack effect is going to bring warm, moist air in the summertime into this garage space. So it's going to be wet in the summer. If it's wet in the winter too, it's I don't know where the water's coming from, but it could be just coming from the car, right? Dripping off the car when she brings it in after being out in the snow.
Yeah, and that's one thing too, Patrick, is that when you bring a cold vehicle that's got salt on it into a warmer space, it gives the salt more. If it was just out in the cold, the salt wouldn't be activated the same way it is when it's moist and warm inside that space.
Yeah, chemical reactions are accelerated with heat. So the warmer that is in there, the more that's salt's going to corrode the exposed steel on the underside of that car.
Yeah.
And I would also make sure that the mechanic wasn't looking for a cream puff and told you that the car was all completely rotted out when it really wasn't. What do you say, Jeff?
I think, the idea that it stays wet and the salt can continue to eat at it is probably a factor in this.
So Patrick, when you recommend pressure washing and then letting it dry really well, how long would it take to dry something like that? I mean, how do you dry that floor?
Forever. And
Forever.
You're going to need a lot of airflow, and you're going to need to run a dehumidifier. You might want to rent something from the rental place designed for, drying houses after disasters, like floor dryers and dehumidifiers. The one thing you have to be wary of is when you're using fans to try and dry a place in a humid summertime conditions, you're actually drawing more humid air into the space, so you're not doing any drying at all. And asked me how I know this.
Yeah. So, there's one other thing he could consider is getting like that fluid film applied on the bottom of the car too. I know a lot of northern states use it on fleet vehicles, and there's been accounts of like bus systems that use busing companies that used to have to do tons of body work because of the salt in the wintertime that are no longer doing major rust repairs on their vehicles.
What is this stuff, Rob?
It's sort of I think it's a paraffin based. It's like a liquid applied coating, but unlike like undercoating, it's like a film that sticks to the surfaces, where if you did like a rubberized or a paint based undercoating, as soon as there's a little gap in there, water gets in and then the rust works its way from inside the undercoating out, where this is a wax or an oil based coating that you have to get reapplied every year or a couple of years. But it does a great job of sticking to any surfaces. I mean, mechanics probably don't like it as much because it can make the surfaces a little bit greasy, but it's not like the environmentally unfriendly method that some people use of like using old motor oil on the bottom of their cars.
So when he says oil spray, do you think that's what he means, old oil, or is it the paraffin stuff?
When he said that, I hope he's talking about the paraffin stuff. Yeah.
All right. Well, that was interesting. I like that question. I don't know that there's a good answer except from moving away from a place that uses so much salt. All right. So the next thing is this is from Big Tuna in Pennsylvania. Hey guys and gal, I've been enjoying the podcast. So I opened up the drywall under my master shower to repair a leaking drain and found this beautiful chop shop done by the original plumber on the joist. What makes me really pissed off is the fact that I am myself a master plumber and have come across this same situation in new construction. The big difference is that I would always get the GC to either let me move the shower or get the carpenters to head off the joist. I know the plywood floor in my house is the only thing holding the compression load from the missing top flange. This is a 9.5-inch joist with a 15-foot span. The cut is on the top of the joist is 3 foot from the bearing wall in the middle of the house. It's been there for 30 years, so now it's my headache. What are my options here? Thanks. Pissed off plumber from PA.
Sounds like your kind of guy.
He has reason to be pissed off. Did you guys see the photo of this wood
Oh
butchery?
yeah, that's lovely. Yeah,
I didn't see
I
it.
mean, I've seen big holes in joists before, but basically it's only the bottom cord of the joist that's still intact.
It is wood butchery at its worst. So this guy entirely removed the top flange and most of the web from this joist, and all those things have to be in place for the thing to work as it's designed to. And I just wonder what if the plumber just said, "I know this is a problem. I'm just going to do this anyway," or if he said to the GC, the joist is in the way of where you want to shower. What do you want to do? And he said, "Cut it."
Yeah.
Not the GC you want on your job, right?
So
I don't know. This stuff happens every day, though.
It happens every day. I asked Big Tuna, what kind of house he lived in. And it's a 2-story house. So, of course, this is under the second story. So he's got the ceiling open up on the first floor now to try and resolve this. If it was on the first floor above the basement space, and assuming the basement was unfinished, it'd be really easy, right? You could even just put a post under both sides of this disaster and fix it that way. But he needs to reinforce this joist somehow. So I went looking on Trust Joist's website for fixes because, as Rob suggests, this is a common occurrence. And they do have fixes if somebody's only cut half of the top flange, right, and left the other half in place and the rest of the web. And you might do that if you just need a little more room for a closet flange or something, for that example. And they have fixes for that. Usually it involves putting a piece of plywood on the side of the joist and following a fastening schedule. But as far as I know, there is no fix if somebody cuts the whole thing apart.
So you have to replace it.
Yeah, and it's not like you can even patch this trap that this person put in is right in the middle of the space. So there's not even any room to patch up the joist if that were even an option, really.
One of the things you can do is you can put another joist in. I think it's within 3 inches, right? So you could, but how do you get that in place in an finished space with a subfloor on top, a ceiling below it, a bearing wall 3 feet away, and it has a bear on the exterior wall at the other end? How are you going to finagle that into the space without jacking and doing some serious beating? It's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, you might be able to get away with it if you had. If you're able to get something that fits loosely in there and is shy of the length of the space, so that you can kind of tuck it up on one side and up on the other side and shim it. But I don't know if that's acceptable with an I-joist.
I don't think there's any fixing solution. I think that the drain trap needs to be cut apart, and that either the shower needs to be relocated so the joist can be reinforced with either solid lumber or whatever. Yeah. Or you need to put another joist in there somehow, or you need to contact Weyerhaeuser and ask them for their fix. That's what I would suggest first. You might get an engineered solution for no money. Alternatively, you might have to call a structural engineer for a fix.
Now, the one thing I did notice in his note, though, is that he said it had been like that for 30 years. So that's kind of how I treat those kinds of things in my house. There's a wall that was removed in my house, and maybe they put a flush beam in the ceiling that I don't know about, but it hasn't moved in the 18 years that I've lived here. So I kind of just leave it alone.
You raise a good point, Rob. And if it were my shower, I would do my very best to reinforce the thing with 3/4 inch plywood and follow the fastening schedules for the sanctioned Weyerhaeuser repairs. And as you suggest, it's been there for 30 years. Fortunately, it's a shower, not a bathtub that might weigh several hundred pounds when it's full of water and a person, so.
But at the same time, now that he knows about it, he's probably very nervous about it.
He has the ceiling open. I mean, I feel like he should do his best to fix it. Steel is perhaps the best solution here because it is so much thinner in cross section than a wood frame solution.
Doesn't Simpson have something for this?
Yeah, but again, we were saying because of the clearance issues with this trap being there, even if there were a fix for an I-joist, there's not really any room to get it in there.
And I've seen those solutions, Jeff, for sawn lumber. I don't know that I've seen one for I-joist, but I could be not aware of them.
Okay, yeah.
Alternatively, just put a wall there in your living space and you'll be all set.
I mean, if he really wants to open up the whole ceiling, and if he he could probably get another joist in there, and worst case scenario, add some some bump out kind of pilasters in against the two walls if he isn't able to get the I-joist up and over the existing bearing walls.
He's not going to do that.
No, I know, but I'm just saying, if that just seems like that's the most straightforward solution if you really care to do this job.
Plumbers out there, tell me why you would do this. Let's hear from some plumbers why you would.
You will.
No one's going to admit to this, or they're going to say the GC told me to do it, and you got to get paid.
Yeah, that's a question that I'd love to get some people to give some real answers on. Is that every trade blames the one that was in there before them for the bad situation, right? The framer put the joist in the wrong place. Oh, the plumber cut the hole without even asking me, and it's like.
A good GC catches this stuff because they've had this stuff go wrong, and unfortunately it takes 30 years to be a good GC because you have to make every mistake. And this is one you learn pretty early. You pay attention to the joist layout for big traps and toilet flanges. And that's just what you do. And ideally you're on the job site when your framer is there, or you trust the person enough to pay attention to this stuff. If you have a really good designer of your floor system, the joist spacing should be adjusted for these kind of plumbing problems.
Yep.
It just gets me kind of upset. This comes from Rob, not you, Rob. So you guys have had some recent discussion about affordability, and we know that architects can help folks get the house they need. But is an architect-designed house accessible to the average homeowner or builder, and should it be? Whoa, this is a very thought-provoking question. Kiley, what do you think he's like? What's the underlying question here?
Yeah, do you need an architect, right? Or how do I afford an architect if I feel I want an architect? Is it even within the realm of possibilities? That's how I interpreted it. And should it be? Yes, emphatically yes. I think they bring value to the project that is unique to their skill set. And if you have a good architect, they can actually build a house for efficiencies that will save you money in the long term. So I think, further the process or move the process along in terms of getting permits and having the right drawings and specifications and whatnot. But I think, I'm also under the impression that it's kind of a white collar privilege to be able to hire an architect, but that doesn't mean that it should be, right? So there are examples of architects in the past who've tried to make design houses that are more affordable. I think Joseph Eckler, he wasn't an architect, he was a developer, but he did that in California with his mid-century modern tract houses. Those were all designed to be affordable post-World War II. So that kind of comes to mind as an example of an effort made there. I do think there are, in my experience of talking to architects, there are some, and in fact, we have a great article from Duo Dickinson, who's an architect in our area, the title of which is How to Afford an Architect. And it's a really well-done article. There are ways that you can, if you're working with somebody who's willing to offer services, maybe pared back services from what they normally offer, and they're willing to work with you, and you're willing to be very involved in the process, and you can set yourself up to get a lot of things done independent of an architect, then I think it's feasible, but you have to be working with the right person who wants to save you that money.
What are some of those things that Duo says you can do as someone working with an architect that would perhaps make it more affordable?
Right. He's got a list of 10 things. Some of them are really basic, just being as involved as possible. So educate yourself, have a really strong idea of what you want. And if you're able to sketch it out to some degree, then that's helpful. Having a clear picture seems like a big thing. Being very clear about what your budget is and offering suggestions for the things that you're willing to do or are capable of doing. Interview a lot of different architects, get the right one, work with your builder. There's a big, one of the things that he does is he offers these 2 different types of services. So he does what he refers to as lightly drawn drawings. So he doesn't get into, he leaves a lot of it up to interpretation for the builder. So he sort of gets them going in the right direction. So it's important to have a builder that you have a good relationship with and who is savvy enough to be able to bridge the gaps, so to speak, So those are a couple things. But it's a great piece. I'll put the link up.
Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, so Kiley and I actually just had a quick chat about this yesterday when she told me about this question, and there's a couple of different avenues depending on what sort of budget you're in. I mean, I've came across a couple of architects' websites where they were comparing the costs of buying a builder house versus an architect designed house, and the architect designed house was typically coming in higher, and architects fees are usually a percentage of the cost of the entire house, and for it to be worth it for them to do a full blown job, and a lot of architects typically want to take on at least some level of production, project management to make sure that things are getting done the way they designed. It's hard for them to be in the really low budget house range. What some architects do is they'll draw up or even make copies of houses that they've done already. They'll draw up stock plans, and then they'll offer modification services at a much lower rate than what they would have if they had to draw the house from scratch. So by them having already designed a number of houses that people were happy with, you're basically buying a stock plan from the source, as opposed to buying one of those sort of like cheap online stock plan places where you're not really getting the kind of support you would as if you got it from the original architect. I know that a lot of architects over the years, Kiley mentioned the Eichler houses, which wasn't an architect, but Frank Lloyd Wright, even during the Depression, when he was kind of slow with his big projects, took on a project that was something he had thought about his whole life, which was they called the Usonian houses, which were these sort of idealistic houses that he hoped would be for the common person, and they were really affordable houses, but at the same time, he was also kind of discounting his services to a level that really wasn't practical for architects making money on smaller projects like that. So I don't know. I would think that search for architects that have stock plans and see if they offer modification services at a reasonable rate is probably one of the most affordable ways to get an architect designed house.
I think you also have to sort of advocate for yourself and be pretty vocal about what you're willing to, that's why those interviewing different architects is probably really smart, and to make sure that you have a voice and that you can take a very active role. You need to be with somebody who's going to let you take that role, right?
Yep.
I've long time listener to the show will not be surprised to hear me say that I've been critical of the field of architecture for this very reason, that it is something in the residential sector that is reserved for very wealthy people. Oftentimes they're designing second, third, fourth, fifth homes. And but I sympathize with the architects too, because honestly, you need to make a living, and the people with money are the ones who can afford to pay you. And it's very tough to see the value of architectural services when your budgets are low. It is an expensive thing to pay for. And I would say that the architecture field could better serve the rest of us by, as Rob suggests, having stock plans that work in a region. They shouldn't be designed for the entire country. They should be regional, and put them up for sale. And I don't think most builders need an architect to build a normal house as far as navigating the process. That good builders know how to build a house. They need a design, which the design community is for, but they don't need the project management side that is often part of the architectural services of an architecturally designed home.
It strikes me that is exactly where the relationship between architects and builders starts to fall down, when architects want to be micromanaging the project.
I think builders would say the same thing.
Yeah.
I think they would.
And that's why it's actually really good to search out architects that either have a close relationship with a builder that they like to work with, or even a design build firm that includes architects or designers and builder and construction managers in the same business. But if you've ever worked in I've I know a lot of architects, and I've worked with architects before, and architects spend a lot of time. You think about all the details that have to go into a house. I mean, like, you would be blown away if you've never actually been in the presence of an architecture designed project, how much time they actually put into every detail of that project. So it's kind of like, we've talked about this before, Patrick, how high-end remodelers, the administrative work on a job is the same no matter whether you're doing small repair jobs or you're doing like a bigger project. So it's like the smaller budget your projects get, the more of them you have to do, but then the more work overall you have to do also, because there's certain things that when you scale a project down, they don't necessarily take less time.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
I was thinking too, like, the field of architecture serves the rest of us in low-income housing and senior housing. And these are very important things for us as a society. And oftentimes it's not recognized as important work, but it really is. And, my wife was in senior and low-income housing development for many years. And the role that the architect plays is very important, and it's very challenging work. The budgets are tight, the construction schedules are difficult, and there are always unforeseen circumstances that they need to help workarounds.
Yeah. Good point, Patrick. I feel like multi-family housing, affordable housing, that's where architects have an opportunity to really do some very good work and make people's lives better with things like additional windows.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
What do you think, Jeff?
Yeah, well, I mean, so much of that is actually in, sort of public sector, not private.
Right. That's true.
That, there's different budgets there.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're still tight, I would tell you. Like, oh
yeah, absolutely.
There's a reason that all, low-income housing has vinyl siding.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to mention before, this is a little bit off the topic, but and I think
Let's never stop you before.
We think we brought this up on the podcast in some other context before, but there's that rural studio. Is that Auburn University? I'm not sure. It's one of the Southern universities.
Yeah.
Rural studio, and they have the 20K house project where
Brian wrote
the
about
architecture professors who are working architects work with their architecture students to design vernacular-based houses for low-income families, and they actually go and build these houses for $20,000. But granted, they're living in a climate where you don't need super tight envelopes. These are very basic, old-fashioned in their technology houses, usually up on piers.
They're tiny too, right?
Natural ventilation.
Very little.
Yeah, but they're good looking. They look like nice little houses, right?
But it's just, it's not necessarily, it doesn't really apply exactly to what we're talking about, but it just sort of gets you to think outside the box that maybe there's different ways to get to the same end with more efficient or creative avenues.
That's the whole thrust of that program, isn't it? To train young architects to do that kind of work, right?
Yep.
I would love to see a collaboration between an architect that works in, Manhattan, where you're potentially designing, 1-2 bedroom apartments in, a few hundred square feet maybe, and apply some of those design principles to the rest of the country. So in places where single family homes are the norm, you can have a small building that's much less expensive to build and heat and cool, and you still have a good design that works in this tiny space.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's interesting you point that out, Patrick, because I was watching some European-based or Australian-based tiny house television show recently. Forget what the name of it was, but they were including urban apartments in their list of tiny houses, because if you really think about it, there are plenty of apartments in New York City that are just as small or smaller than a lot of the tiny houses you see on these popular TV shows right now.
And a half a dozen people are probably living in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And you're not in the woods.
I'd love to hear some architects on this subject. This is one of those things we can't solve on the podcast, but it is certainly an interesting discussion, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I wanted to share something with you guys here. And this came into the podcast email box, and if it escaped you, I just wanted you to know. So it says, we are offering the domain name insulationadvisors.com on behalf of our client for $299 American. Domain name is suitable for your business and will help you in generating more sales and revenue. Have a great day. What do you think, Rob? Should we get that?
I don't know. I don't want to actually say what domain I think we should go for, but I think we should search one that's more closely aligned with some of the nicknames we get here on the podcast. So fineairsealing.com or something like that.
Well, I appreciate those of you who are listening, and I appreciate especially enduring the rocky start we had last week with the first remote recorded podcast. I think it went a little better today. What do you guys think?
I hope so.
Yeah.
It's hard to tell until you watch after.
We were having some troubles with getting used to the delay with our interactions. So I think that went better today. But thank you all for listening. Thanks to Rob, Kiley, and Jeff for joining us, and thanks very much for listening. Please remember to send us your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. And let us know what you think about the new format, how we can improve it or change it or whatever, if you like it. There's some talk about having a second podcast that'll be more geared toward professional concerns, especially now with the new business climate we're in. So keep an eye out for that. And once again, thank you all for listening.